All right, and we are recording. Thanks to everybody for coming today. This is the first of two webinars on the 2024 Public Libraries Annual Report. This one, we are covering basically all of the content in the survey. The next webinar, which is going to be next Friday, just focuses on the changes from last year, of which there are a moderate amount, I would say. So you don't need to go to both of them. It will be totally duplicative, so I wouldn't recommend that. Uh, but as always, thanks so much for coming. And we will jump right in. Um, oh, sorry. So I should say bookkeeping stuff. Everybody should be, I've turned off cameras for everybody, so nobody has to get into the recording. I will be muting people initially, but you can unmute yourself at will when you have questions. And we have sort of it's kind of little sections, and at the end of each little section, I'll ask if you have questions, and then we'll have time for questions at the very end as well. So thank you. Okay, I'm muting everybody initially, and here we go. Public Library Annual Report. Okay, so this is a new slide that I didn't have before, which is top 3 rules to know about the annual report. I'm doing this before explaining anything else because I think they are crucial. Hold on, sorry, just adding a couple more people into the meeting. Okay, 3 things to know. If these are your only takeaways, that's fine. Number 1 is whenever you have a question about the report or are stuck or anything like that, ask me. Don't feel like you should spend a few hours on it and really try it out and then ask me. Just ask me. Email, phone, whatever. That is perfect. That's what I'm here for. I'm here to help because I really appreciate all the work that you do to make the report happen. So that's number 1. Number 2. If you find that you don't have a good answer for a question, the data just doesn't exist. You weren't tracking it, or something happened and it's just wrong. This year we've changed from NA to M for missing, but the important piece is just put M in. You don't get points off if there's a question you didn't answer. We just put it in there, and that's totally fine. Don't worry about the fact that you don't have an answer for a question. We don't want you to guesstimate. We don't want you to, it's probably about 2000. Don't do that. Just put in M, and that's perfect. Okay. Number 3, and maybe the first one's probably the most important, but this is also clutch. We will all get through the report together. The report is a lot, especially the first few times. It's a lot. But it will all work out. And at the end of the day, whatever data we have gotten from every library, we are super appreciative for. So if there's things that don't work, if there's data that isn't there, it's totally fine. I know it's a huge amount of work on top of the fact that you don't have enough time to do the rest of your work, and we really appreciate it. But the important piece is we will all get through it, yeah, it'll all work out. So those are my top 3 rules. And the arrow didn't work. All right. So what is the annual report? Most of you know this already. The annual report is a statistical overview of a year in the life of a public library. It is completed nationwide. Every state and territory, every public library in every state and territory is intended to participate. It's supposed to cover almost everything that is quantifiable, basically finance, programming, CERC, number of patrons, really everything that they think they could get coherent numbers on, that's what they're trying to get. Most questions are determined by the IMLS, Institute of Museum and Library Services, with input from each state library. So that's a gradual process that happens, and you will see questions change, and the change happens after a lot of discussion and then a vote. The other questions are added specifically by the Department of Libraries. So there are sort of Vermont questions, and then there are federal questions. The state questions we have more control over, so we can kind of tweak them from year to year. The federal ones have to follow the federal model. But that's the report. Okay. Who uses the info in the report? I have a whole list here. Basically, the short version is a whole bunch of people. From at the national level, the state level, and the local level. There are a lot of different people who can use it, all the way from IMLS at the federal level and the federal government down to each individual library can find this data and compare themselves with other libraries nationwide. So it gets used by a lot of different people. It's also especially useful at the end of the day for local libraries too, to see where they how they compare with everybody in the state and across the country. Right. Okay. So when does the report due? First off, the report happens every year. There are other reports that exist that are, every other year or something like that. And this annual report, thus the name, is due every year nationwide. So the tentative dates for this year are, for the submission window, are November 1st through December 31st, with an optional extension that goes to January 20th. So it is, I say tentative because it's possible that they could get tweaked a little bit. It depends on our vendor has to basically every time that we do a new report and change things, they have to do that. But they're also doing it for 25 other states, give or take. So it can be a little bit of a late start. But right now, I'm still hopeful that we'll be opening on November 1. Okay, I say an optional extension. How do you get the optional extension? What hoops do you have to jump through? You ask me, email me, call me, whatever, and you will have it. You don't need to prove that you're busy or what have you. You just get it. Um, if there are any libraries, and we'll talk about this, you know what? I'll table that for a second. But yes, basically to get the extension, just ask for it. Um, we want to try to get as much data as we can, so that's why the extension exists, to try to get people through. I know that the November through December window is a little bit challenging in parts because the holidays are not a great time to get things done. But this is sort of has been traditionally our window, so aiming for earlier in the window helps you avoid the holidays if that's a thing that's practical. Okay. All right. Okay, so this is one of the more complicated pieces in the report, or can be. What time period are you reporting on? Um, so, libraries in Vermont have a number of different fiscal years. I won't go into them, but suffice to say there are a number of different options. Um, some popular ones that a lot of libraries have, and then there are unique ones that individual libraries have. So, how do you figure out what you're reporting this year in the report? Okay, so there's sort of a cascading series of rules here. Rule number one, whatever you did last year, do the year after it. That's unless your fiscal year has changed since then. That is a good starting point. If you just do that, you will probably be fine. And in general, that's just how things should be working. Rule two, if there's something weird happening, you should, in general, people are submitting the last fiscal year that ended before October 15th, which basically means if you have the July 1st to June 30th year or the October 1st to September 30th year, you just give us the last one. Give us the one that ended in June or September. However, if you're on the calendar year, January through December, generally you are submitting last year's data, the 2023 data. So that's what you would probably be doing. But some calendar year libraries are sort of effectively a year ahead. They submitted 2023 last year. You can't submit the same data twice, so they are submitting 2024. But then rule three, and this sort of trumps everything, is if you have any question about what you're reporting, what time period you're reporting, any question, ask me beforehand. Ask me before you do anything. Getting halfway through it and discovering you were reporting on the wrong year, a year we can't take, is terrible. Is no good. It is my least favorite thing. So if you have any questions at all about what your year is, ask before you start. The year that I have on file that I think you should be filling out will be in the sort of intro email that you're all going to get shortly. But if you have questions about it, ask ahead of time. So yes, okay. We're getting close to okay. So before we talk about updated questions, does anybody have questions on what I've covered so far? If you do, you can either unmute yourself and ask, or you can raise your hand, or you can put it in the chat. Any of those work fine. Okay. we'll keep going. There wasn't that much to ask questions on so far, I know. All right, so next one, updated questions for this year. What have we changed for this year? I would say there's a medium amount of changes this year, but let's just run through them real quick. Okay, first off, we last year, if you had a question that you did not have data for, where the data wasn't available, you just couldn't answer the question. We were putting in NA for not available. We've changed it to M for missing because not available is also not applicable, and that's a totally different thing to some degree. So this year, if you don't have it, put an M in, and that's what we'll be trying to do. Okay, number 2, staffing. The staffing questions, we just rewrote them a little bit to emphasize that we're looking for number of hours, staff hours worked, not number of staff. Because we're using the IMLS questions and they ask for FTE staff. It looks like that we want number of staff, but we don't. We want number of hours. But we rewrote it, so that should hopefully just be clearer now. Oh, hold on one second. Just adding somebody into the meeting.
Hours of when this could be and where that could be.
And there we go. Okay, so that's staffing. Grants. This is small, but we added back. We used to have these 2 specific questions about summer programming and career grants. We tell you they will include how much the amounts were for the last 2 years, so you should just be able to plug in that amount. And we did that because they were ending up in the wrong category for state and federal because it's not at all obvious which is which. But now we have a separate question for them. All right, expenditures. This is also a minor one. This is a federal change. They clarified what goes under collections expenses, specifically physical, electronic, and other, because electronic is basically means online. It doesn't mean CDs, DVDs, or playaways, which it sounds like it should, but it doesn't. So they rewrote it, so it should be a little bit clearer than it was before. Okay, holdings. Holding changes, we did 2 things. First off, simplified a little bit. For number of downloadable like ebooks and audiobooks, we had been asking you for your full number. And now we're just asking you for how many your library purchased individually. We are just going to add in the consortium numbers on our own, so you won't have to deal with them. So it's just if you do Overdrive Advantage or you buy Palace Marketplace stuff for your patrons, we just need that number, which is probably going to be a lot smaller than the consortium number. And so that's all you're putting there now. And you're still saying what you belong to, but you don't have to get that number. Additionally, we physical serials, aka magazines, subscriptions, we've been asking that forever. We are dropping that question because there's not a good way really to track online usage, or I mean online magazines, and so many libraries have moved so much of their usage to online that we felt like just counting how many physical magazines you have is not a super useful number anymore. But yeah, okay, so that's holdings. Next, downloadables and databases. So this is a change at the federal level. There is a new series of yes/no questions that basically ask how you get a couple of different categories of stuff. How do you get ebooks? How do you get e-serials? If you do, how do you get e-video? How do you get databases? And they break them into research databases, which is like Vermont Online Library, or what do they call it? A learning database like Udemy or something. And so you're just here, you're going to say, where do we get it from? We get it from our own library because we pay for it. We get it from a consortium like Mango or something like that with GMLC, or we get it from the state. And you are just saying yes or no on those. So they may be unclear the first time, but I think once we get used to them, they'll be easy to answer because the yes/no ones are, once you get used to them, are pretty easy. So that's questions for the first batch of, let's see, updated. Now we have, again, a few more. Okay. Other questions that have changed this year. Number of borrowers. Though previously that was adult and children. That's what it's been before. We added a new category called YA and teen, which is only for libraries that have created a YA or teen category. Um, just for simplicity's sake, I know that with the recent changes in 220, some libraries added a YA18 category. If you have one, put it in there. If you don't have one, we don't care. We don't want it. We just want it to be easy for you to fill out. So you'll see that when it's there. And again, just going to repeat it again. We don't want you to, we're not telling you to have a YA or teen category. If you have one, we just want to make it easy to fill out. Okay. E-circulation. So this is like downloadables and other online circ. We have sort of changed, well, the feds changed the way that they were asking it, and so we've simplified it because of that. Previously, we had ebooks and e-audiobooks and then everything else, and then we had them broken down by age, which was a lot. So now the IMLS asks circulation of ebooks, circulation of e-serials, online magazines, circulation of e-audiobooks, and circulate and music if you have offer that, and e-video. But we don't break it down by age. So there are those 4 categories, and I know some of those may be challenging, but we'll do our best with them. And if you can't get one, you can't get one. So, but yeah, again, you don't need to figure out the age ranges on these going forward. You could decide, this is a point we'll talk about later, you could decide that you like having that, and in which case you're welcome to keep track of anything you want, but we're not asking for it because that would be for 12, 14, 15 questions, something like that, and that just seemed like too many. Okay. IMLS added a question about auto renewals, which basically is, does your ILS, your catalog software, automatically renew items when they become due for patrons if there are no holds? You just say yes or no. It's not a number. A lot of increasing number of libraries offer this option, and it's sort of important because it makes your circ, it can make your circ numbers look a lot higher than they might have before. So to make sure we're not dealing with apples to oranges, we're just asking if you do that. Okay, auto renewals. Programming. Programming is maybe the biggest change that we've had this year. We tried to simplify it. It was a lot. There were 32 questions in programming. I spent probably a third of my report work was trying to deal with programming questions. So hopefully this is better. I know it's going to take an adjustment. We're going to ask separately, we're going to say programs in attendance by age. So programs in attendance for 0 to 5, 6 through 11, 12 to 18, 19 plus, and general interest. We want programs in attendance. So that's going to be, what's that, 5, so 10 questions right there. Boom, boom, boom. And then, and then separately, you're going to answer program in attendance for offsite. This is a total, and then virtual. That's a total. So formerly, we asked each age for onsite, offsite, and virtual, which made for a lot of questions. Now we're asking for just the ages, each category, and then separately, we're going to ask for offsite and virtual with the assumption, then we're going to subtract to make onsite with the assumption that most people, the majority of your programming is onsite. So again, that will be a little bit different, but I'm hopeful that it will gradually be that it'll be easier down the line, that it'll be less work. Okay, and I see there are question or comments, but I'll circle back to them once I finish this slide. But thank you. Outreach. We have a new question for outreach events like tabling or farmers markets or parades, other things that are not a traditional library program, where people are just coming by and doing something quick or something like that. So we have a new question for that. It's a pilot question. We know it's new. You don't have numbers going back. So give us whatever numbers you have or put missing and just note that it's a thing that will be coming around going forward. And then last but not least, we had a website visits question. It was very hard to track and we felt not terribly useful, and we're not doing it anymore. So it's gone. You don't need to figure that out. All right, so those are all the questions. Let me field a couple of these. Okay, Is GMLC the same as Libby? Sort of. GMLC, Green Mountain Library Consortium, offers a variety of services for libraries, for participating libraries. Vocal is one of them, but what used to be called Listen Up Vermont, Overdrive, Libby/Overdrive is one of their big ones. And that's very popular. There's something like 130 public libraries in the state that are on that system. So when we say GMLC in the context of the report, we're often talking about Overdrive. Um, Mango is another thing that would come up a little bit, but mostly we're talking about that. And yeah, and whenever we say Overdrive, Libby and Overdrive are the same thing. They're the same company. So thank you, Myrna, for asking that. And I'm happy to elaborate on that if somebody could use it. And then Tracy says, we're so small, we only count juvenile and adult. It's totally fine. Whatever your numbers look like, either put them into however they work. There's also an option, and this is sticking around, for if you can't break down by age or by location or whatever, there's a spot to just put total. This is our total number of programs, total number of attendance. So if you can't break it down, you can do that. But if you can partially break it down, you can put it in whatever category you have. And that's totally fine. As always, we appreciate whatever numbers we get. Okay, so those were the question changes for this year. Any additional questions about the question changes for this year? And you can unmute yourself or raise your hand or whatever you like. My hope is that there are a couple that might be additional work, but some of them I'm hopeful will be less work going forward. And I guess we'll see. Okay, so we're going to keep marching forward. Okay, a reminder on the survey. In many cases, in the survey, you will just see the name of the question or a brief explanation, but you won't see the entire question. If that's the case, there's going to be a little circular question mark icon next to it that looks like a sort of help icon. If you click on that, it will pop up a window that has the whole text of the question. I would recommend getting in the habit of clicking that basically all the time, especially until you feel like you have these things down totally. In some cases, the language is fairly long, so I apologize for that. That's especially the federal questions. But there's a lot of details in there that will help you clarify what should go in here and what shouldn't go in here. So I would recommend just that becoming a habit. Okay, here's a question. Boom. Okay, that's exactly what I thought it was. We're fine. Or boom. Oh, that's different. Okay, I have to figure out how to do this. So I know it's a pain, but if we left all the text in, the survey would be a lot of pages long, and so this makes it a lot shorter a lot sort of visually shorter. There's just fewer pages, but this is always there. Okay, so that's how you see the entire question. Okay, a quick talk about sample periods. And this is just ongoing. So in general, we're trying to move away from estimates that are not based on sample data, where people say, I bet we have 3,000 computer uses in a year or something like that. We probably have something like that. We're trying to gradually move away from that. That's going to be a long-term process. But for things that are hard to track year round, the ones I'm thinking of are reference questions, because it's hard to answer reference questions and run the desk while you keep track of it, though some people do. Computer usage and visits if you don't have an electronic door counter. These are things that if you can track year round, that's great. But if you can't track year round, an alternative is to pick a couple of sample periods and kind of get a number for them and then multiply to create an annual number. So the way that sample periods work in general, I mean, you can do whatever you want. You could be like, I sample 1 week a month or something like that, but that seems like a lot. In general, the sort of recommended approach, or a recommended approach, is to pick a couple of sample periods in times of the year that are not terribly busy, but also not terribly slow. Something like potentially May or October, but you'll know whether May or October are average for you all. not like peak summer, not like dead of winter. So pick that, pick a 1 or 2 week period, be like, all right, May, 10th to 24th. We're going to do this. We're going to count for that period, write it all down, pop, 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 and then we just use that and multiply it by whatever you need to make it annual number. That means that you have an annual grounded number that you can be like, okay, that is based on a sample. It may not be perfect, but it is based on a number and is not pulled out of the air. So that's the thing you can do. Obviously, you can't retroactively do that. So if you didn't do a sample period, that doesn't help you. But this is sort of a thing that we are gradually trying to move to sample periods for numbers that you aren't able to capture year round. But again, an alternative is if you don't have the number, enter M for missing. We would rather have missing than a number that you pulled out of your head, is what it comes down to. Missing isn't bad. It's not wrong. It's just an approach that is is available at all times if there's a number that that is hard to get or that you didn't get this time around. Okay, I think we have one. Okay, we'll do a couple more and then pause for questions again. Some basics of the report. If you need a login, ask me. You're going to get an intro email very soon that has your login, but at any point, if you're stuck with a login question, it's the same as last year and they don't change. But if you ever have a login issue, just reach out to me and I can get it for you. But you will see that intro email probably next week, I'm thinking. I didn't want to lead too much because the survey is not open yet, so you can't actually do anything with it. And you'll just try to log in and get stuck. And you won't see anything to fill out. Okay. You can work on the report in any order you want. You don't have to do it in order. You can do sections. You can jump around. You don't have to do anything in one sitting. It's whatever order works best for you. The default, so there's a new the survey's been updated. It will look different. It works basically the same way. There's a couple of improvements in it, but it generally will look roughly similar, except maybe a little more modern. One of the changes is that now it shows last year's answers by default. You can turn it off, but by default, you'll see what you did last year. And I think that's always handy just to kind of, because then you're like, wait, this number is 10 times higher than last year. Something's weird here. And that's good for edit checks when you get to later. If ever the last year's answers turn off, there's a little button in the upper right-hand corner. You can turn it off, turn it back on. And I'm just repeating, if you have a question, ask me. Don't feel like you should figure it out on your own. No matter how many years you have done it, do not feel like you should figure it out on your own. That is literally what I'm here for. Okay, that's basics of the report. A few important notes. Okay, with a new version of the site, and I'll show you this because we're going to hop into the survey in a second. When you go into your survey, it's going to ask you your name and email address. This is there because it stops you from having two people in the survey now. When you have two people in the survey, previous years, it is very easy to overwrite each other's stuff. And that ends up being super sad and kind of confusing. So this no longer lets you do it. And if a second person were to come in, or if, for example, I was trying to go into your survey to work on something, it would say, oh, X person is already in the survey. This is their email address. And you can talk to them. But basically, hopefully, we will prevent the thing where two people are in at the same time, which could be problematic. Also, the new version of the site should save your data each time you leave a field. Formerly, it would, whenever you changed pages, it would save it, but it was possible to fill something in and then leave and totally lose that. Now, every time you leave a field, it should get saved. There's still a save button on the bottom of the page, but in general, it should save it every time, and that's, I think, is a nice addition. Okay, browser buttons. This is still true. In general, we recommend avoiding using your browser buttons. It's probably not as bad as it was before, because before it would be easy to lose stuff because it wasn't getting saved, and now it should be saving automatically. But in general, we still recommend not using browser buttons. Use previous or next or the side navigation to move through the survey. You're just probably going to be happier that way, and things won't be as quirky. Browser versions. In general, Google Chrome or the recent versions of Microsoft Edge seem to work best. Firefox mostly works, but could have quirks. Safari likewise will probably work, but could also have quirks. If you have an old version of Microsoft Edge or GASP Internet Explorer, don't use it. It will be bad. Don't use it. Also, generally, you shouldn't use either of those anyway, but unless you have, yes, you shouldn't if you could avoid it. But Chrome or Edge are probably your best bets. But if you have something else because you don't have a choice, it will mostly work correctly. And I'm hopeful the new version probably works a little bit better on that than the old one did. But um, all right. Okay, any questions on the stuff I just covered? We're just about to get to the spot where we show off the news survey. And again, you can unmute or raise your hand or put in chat. Okay. All right. So this is just a quick overview, and then we'll hop in. These are the parts of the survey. Directory info, staffing section, facilities questions, operating income, capital revenue, and operating expenditures. And then holdings, which is everything that you own, everything in your collection, and services, which is basically everything else, and ends up being about 35% of the survey, including it includes programming. So there's a lot of questions in there. But yeah, okay. So that is roughly the overview. Okay, so I'm going to hop out of the PowerPoint and jump into the actual survey right now. So let's see if we can do that without breaking anything. Okay, I want. All right, so hopefully everybody can see my screen. Let me see if I can make it a little bit bigger. Okay. If you can't see my screen right now, please shout. Okay. So we're just going to kind of go through the basics and then we're going to do each section relatively speedily. But okay. So when you go to log in, this is what you see. I'm going to log in as a library, so you see the actual library experience. If anybody is here from Concord Public Library, I apologize for using your account. Okay, so you put in your username and password. You come here, it will show you current surveys, and then it will show you surveys that you have already completed. So in your case, most of your cases, you will see a lot of things in here. But for Concord, we see less. So because they're relatively new to the survey. Okay. So I'm going to click the 2024 isn't done yet, so you can't see it yet. But 2023, we're going to click on. And we can only get in here because it's unlocked. Surveys get locked, and if you ever need something unlocked, just ask me. Okay, so I'm clicking on the 2023 survey. All right, so this is the new window you're going to see. This is the one that is designed to keep us from being in the survey at the same time. And it might remember it after you do it. Okay. All right. So survey, we're going to kind of run through this in order. At this point, please feel free to jump in with, oh, I think we just got somebody new. Feel free to sort of just pop in with questions at any point because I can't exactly see the chat anymore as well. But that's a lie. I can see the chat. It'll just pop up from my window. So, but we don't need to necessarily wait on things. Okay. So first part is the directory. Directory is generally should be the easiest. Oh, hold on one sec. Sorry, just letting somebody in. Okay. All right, so we are marching through the report now. Directory is relatively easy. It's basically address, phone number, etc. for the library. The first few questions are all locked because they're assumed that they don't change very often. If they do change, you need to tell me, and I can change them. So that's, physical location, etc. Okay, then you also fill out current director, current director's email address, current president chair, current President Chair's email address. These are basically here in case we have questions about the report. They don't get put somewhere else. We don't do anything else with them. Um, they yeah, they're just there for sort of question asking. Okay. So, okay, sorry, I should have actually added a thing. And so that's why we're not going to get too granular on the questions. This is still the 2023 survey. So things are going to look a little bit different from it. So I'm going to kind of do broad strokes when you ask questions because a couple of questions have changed. But anyway, so that's in this section, contact info, info for the director and the president or chair of the board, information about whether you're incorporated or municipal, and then we get to real questions here. How many weeks was the library open, physically open? This is if you're open year round, you're 52. If you were closed for something, renovations or something else, then you take those weeks out. If you're only open part of the year, those weeks are out as well. Okay, and then service hours. So this is how many hours you were open in the year. This is this doesn't. You don't need to take out every holiday that you close. This is sort of a general broad strokes of your rough hours for the year. So you figure out how many hours you're open during a week, you multiply it by the number of weeks, that's the number of hours. If there are weeks that you're closed, you can take those out, but you don't need to get, oh, we closed for, Memorial Day, that we lose 8 hours there. We closed for, you don't need to do that. The question is written in a way, and you can't see this, but minor variations are not important here. Okay, weeks, hours. Sorry, I'm gonna go faster on the questions because I'm really just trying to talk about what's in a section, not go over every question. Then there's a section if you have a bookmobile or branch. If you don't have a bookmobile or branch, you don't need to fill that part out. And we're going to do hours and weeks open for that. Page 2 of directory info is first off reporting period. We talked about reporting period earlier. So this is the beginning and end of what you're putting into the report. And then population. Population is going to be filled in by me. You don't need to worry about that. If you ever have questions about where population comes from, there's a page on our website, or I can talk to you about it. But we get it. We create that number based on a series of formulas, and it's just there. So you don't have to enter that. Any questions on the directory pages? Please feel free to shout or put something in the chat or raise your hand. Oh, Tracy asked, when we have questions as we fill this out, is emailing you or calling you the best way to contact me? Either is fine. You will probably get a quicker response on email just because most of what I get is email, and so it's easier in my workflow to just do another email. Whereas when you're probably not going to actually catch me on the phone, so I'll have to call you back. So email works a little bit faster if that's an option. If it doesn't work great, that's fine too. Phoning call is fine too. But thanks for asking that. Okay, so we're going to hop to staffing. Basically, these are the number of weekly hours in each category. Weekly staffed hours, weekly paid hours, various kinds of librarians, and then all other paid staff. And then we also ask if there are any staff who are paid outside the library's budget. We ask for average volunteer hours. And then this last question asks how many paid staff you have. So this is the exception. This is the only one where we want to know a number of staff and not a number of hours. Yes, so that's basically that. The important thing is we're looking for weekly hours. If your hours change year long, then we kind of want an average or normal number. And yeah, so that is the staffing page on it. A good question that you could ask is, what is the difference between a librarian and an other staff? And in general, my suggestion is, if you've been doing this, is to do whatever you do every year. The definition isn't great. There's not a great disparity in explanation in IMLS for what you do. It basically is described as how do they describe it? Let's see. All other staff is Yeah, hold on. Sorry, I did the wrong one. Anyway, it's a fine line between whether it is a librarian or other staff. To some degree, uh, if it requires professional training, you would be in the librarian side, and less so in the other side. But people sort of draw the line where they want to. Anyway, I should probably not have brought that up entirely because that's a whole um, kettle of fish. But I'm always happy to elaborate on that. Whatever you're doing is fine. Is the short answer. Um, any questions on staffing besides the thing that I just made more complicated than it needed to be? Okay, facilities. Facilities is we added 2 years ago, I think. Formerly, we just asked for square footage. Now we ask a number of other things. The one thing about these is they will keep your answers from last year with the assumption that mostly things don't change unless you've had construction from last year. So we ask about what year the building was built, what year there was a renovation, if there was. Then there's a couple of qualitative ones. How does the building meet your needs? Um, both in terms of size and condition. And then there's some questions about meeting rooms. Then there is the same series of things for a second building or branch, if you have a branch or second building. If you don't have a branch or second building, ignore the second part. And again, these should all be carryover from last year, though if you need to change anything, you can. Um, and we appreciate having this. This is how we know that the average, based on reporting libraries, the average public library in Vermont was built in 1912, which I think that not other states don't necessarily have that information, but I imagine 1912 skews older than most states. Okay, so that's facilities. If you have any questions about facilities, please jump in. And otherwise, I am going to jump to sort of the meat of the report, which is operating revenue, which is the first, I would say, somewhat challenging question, page on it. Okay, operating revenue tries to capture the majority of revenue coming into your library. There are a few kind of exceptions that don't necessarily get counted, but most of the income that comes into the library that is in your budget should be counted here. The first one, and it often, though not always the largest, is support from your town or villages or other municipality that you were getting funds from. Uh, you can add as many as you want. So every town that you get something, write the town name and the amount that you got. So that's the first one, and in many cases is the largest income for libraries, but not always. Okay, next from there we go to grants. This coming year, the 2024 report, you will see one that says you will see summer programming grant, and it will tell you what the amount would be if you got that, and then it will ask any other state government revenue, and then that'll add it up. Then you'll see the career grant and the amount that would be for if you got the career grant, and then any other federal grants, and then it will add it up for you. And then last but not least, total amount of all other grants, including private grants. This is anything that didn't come from the state or federal, which is, again, is typically private grants. Um, any of the other sort of charitable organizations in Vermont or nationwide mostly will go into this category. But that's grants. I'm going to hop to the next one. Let's see. Just want to make sure I'm not missing anything. Okay, next page is a little more nitty-gritty. There are questions about if you charge non-resident borrower fees, and if so, how much, and what is the total amount you got from that? Your overdue fine policy, and this is just a yes or no. Do you charge overdue fines on anything, or you don't on anything? And then the total income that you've gotten from late fines, if you're able to break that out. Next, all other income. This is predominantly donations and fundraising, but there can be other things that come in here as well. The lion's share is usually fundraising. Okay, that is it for income that involve numbers. Then we have the section at the bottom, which used to be called in kind, and it's basically services provided to the library for free by other organizations, either a municipality or someone else entirely. And these are all checkboxes. They're yes, no. You don't need to know the amount. You just need to know whether you're getting it. And the question, if you have a question on whether, if it's sort of partial support, any sort of significant amount of support counts as a yes here. This will also carry over from last, or should carry over from last year. So if nothing has changed, you can just leave it like it was. Okay, let's see. All right, so that is income. Any questions on income or revenue? It gets called both in various spots. Okay, so let's hop to the next one. Next one is capital revenue. Okay, this one is most of the time pretty easy because frequently libraries put in zeros because they have not gotten any capital revenue. This is money that you've gotten, and then also, let's see, spent. Oh no, sorry, spending is elsewhere. Money that you have received for capital expenses. Capital expenses are generally construction or large construction or renovation, but it can be other large one-time expenses. Like we've saved up money to get a new computer network or to get set up on a new ILS and to automate, or we need a new roof. I guess that's actually renovation. So in general, it's a large one-time expense. If it's can go under here. If it's not a large one-time expense, then it doesn't want to live here. So in many cases, you'll have zeros unless you happen to have stuff coming in for this. Okay, that's capital revenue. Any questions on capital revenue? And otherwise, I am going to jump to expenditures. Oh yes, Myrna, you've got your hand up. Feel free to unmute yourself.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. So, Josh, we had to replace our computers, but we didn't have to fundraise. Somehow we found money that was, I guess, in another column and should have been. So anyway, but that was a one-time big expense. Do we put it there or only if we had to fundraise for it?
It's a little, I'll say it's a little nebulous whether it goes on and particularly from your description. It's sort of, if it feels like it was a pretty big expense for the library, then it would be worth then you could put it in capital. It seems like it might be right on the edge, and probably either way is okay for you, but it's really a question of major expense that would look really significant, and in some ways that would look weird if it's in the other. That's a piece of it, I think, actually, which I don't think I've verbalized before. But if it would look weird to your overall expenses if it was not in capital, like you'd say, oh, their budget just like increased dramatically. If it's an amount that's large enough for that to happen, that is a sign that maybe it belongs in capital. But if it's a sign that's more like a day-to-day amount, then it's fine to put it in your normal amount. So that was an elaborate way of not answering your question, but it ends up being a judgment call whether how much it is compared to how much your annual budget is. If you sort of just tweaked it out a normal budget, it might be fine to just keep it in the normal budget amount and not call it capital. But if it feels like people will look at it and be like, wow, why did your budget go up this year? And you think that might be a thing, that's one of the reasons that things go into capital, so that it doesn't throw people off and confuse them and then it goes back down the next year. So it's just a question of scale, I would say. And I'm happy to, does that?
I will go over that with you individually because there were other expensive, like changing the internet provider and a couple other things that came after that. So, and gotcha. Now we have remote backup that we didn't, we used to do manual. So that's costing us money now. Okay.
Yeah.
But
we
Yeah.
can talk about it, and that's always for anybody who has questions about that piece or anything else like that, feel free to ask me, and we can kind of nail it down. And sometimes it requires a lot of back and forth to kind of figure out what it feels like makes the most sense from where you are at. So thank you for asking that. That's great. Solid question. Okay. Okay, so now we're in operating expenditures. So we already covered everything that was coming in for the most part, and this is everything that is going out. Okay, first off, collection expenditures. This is broken into print, electronic, and again, electronic means online, pretty much. And then other, and other means both DVDs, audiobooks, physical stuff, and then also non-traditional items. All will go in other. That's the thing that the naming convention is a little confusing, but that's where these go. And then there's a section, and we've gotten to the part of the survey where there's a lot of these. If you can't break it down, there's also a spot to put a total in. That's totally fine. We'll take whatever data you have. So collections, thing number one. Thing number two, employee expenditures. So that is broken into salaries and wages and employee benefits, if you can break it down. And then if you can't break it down, there's a total. One thing I'd like to add about employee benefits is this does include things like Social Security and Medicare, which are not typically thought of as being benefits, but are under this view. So if there are any salary, there should be benefits. And if you put in salary and no benefits, I am going to ask you about it afterwards, 100% of the time, because there had to be Social Security or Medicare happen, even if there's no insurance or any of the other things. In many cases, these numbers will come if you're municipal. They may come from the town treasurer or whoever else does finance over there. If you are incorporated, they may come from the treasurer for the library, which could be, or a finance person, which could be somebody internal, but could be somebody on the board. So you may have to ask somebody for help on these. Okay, that is page one of expenditures. Next, this is one we added a little while ago, programming expenditures. This is looking for anything you basically spent for stuff that you needed to make programming happen or performers. You shouldn't put staff time in here. Staff time goes in the other spot, but everything else that maybe goes into programming should go in here. We broke it down by adult, teen, and children's if you can, and then there's a category if you can't. I know that capturing programming can be a hard one to get. So do your best, and if you don't have programming numbers, that's fine too. Okay, from there, you know what, I'm going to make it a little bit bigger. I think that might be helpful. Sorry about that. I hope those first ones weren't too small to read, but we'll go bigger now. Okay, and then we have other operating expenses. Those are broken into building operation expenses, including utilities, technology expenses, which is hardware, software, internet, etc., web hosting, anything like that, photocopiers and printers. And then other expenses, which is anything that wouldn't fit into building, technology, or programming. And once again, there is a spot for other. So you can just put everything in other if you aren't able to break it down. But those are, those are the basic ones. We used to just have an other, and we kind of broke it out to cover more things, to break it down a little bit better, to give it more granularity, but we know in some cases it's hard to get these numbers. Okay, so that's that. Then there's one more question, which is capital expenditures, which is how much money, again, was spent on capital projects this year. So yeah, that is the end of expenditures. Do we have any questions on expenditures that people would like to talk about? Okay, let's keep moving forward. Yeah, let's keep moving forward. Okay, so the next three are about what's in your collection. These are they're a bit lengthy questions, but they're yes, but hopefully they're not terribly difficult to get because mostly your ILS should be outputting a report that gives you most of these. You might have to do a little bit of math. Oh, a thing I forgot to say that might have been in the slideshow, but that I forgot to say is I strongly recommend when you get these numbers together, putting them on paper or putting them in a Word document or something like that. And not having the only copy be in the report. Because if something goes awry and you lose a page, in some cases, people will be like, "Oh, I did all this math. I came up with a number. I put it in the thing, and now it's gone, and I don't know what the number is." So I definitely recommend having an Excel file or a Word file or just a piece of paper that has the numbers as you write them into the survey, so they're just there. And it can be really easy to helpful to have this ahead of time, and then you're just copying from one to the other when you fill out the survey. But I recommend not having the survey be the only place a number exists. It's just not, it can end in tears. So I wouldn't do that if you can avoid it. Anyway, okay, that's an aside. It has nothing to do with collections. So collections numbers, we have, first off, print based. All these are broken down by adult, teen, or children. And then if you can't do it, there's an answer that is total. So we have print materials. So these are books by and large, and then a few other weird things. Then we have video. These are DVDs and video playaways, Blu-rays, anything like that. Same categories. Audio items. These are music CDs, CD audiobooks, digital playaways, things like that. Records or cassettes, anything in that camp goes here. Okay. So next, non-traditional items. Okay. This is one we added not that long ago, or actually they added it at the federal level. So this is, let's see, I think I have somebody who just popped in. Hold on one sec. All right. Okay, sorry. So we are on page 2 of collections. So we have non-traditional items. This is everything that is in the non-traditional camp, which is everything else. It can be muffin tins, it can be puzzles, it can be gardening tools, it can be hotspots, it can be laptops if you lend them. Anything that is not traditionally you lend, we want a number here. If you check things out as a unit, like a large, it was like 5 puzzles together, treat it as one thing if they go out as a unit. Or like, this is our kitchen supplies thing, and it goes out as a box, that is one item if you can do that. And this is just number that you have. Okay. This is going to look different next year, but this is ebooks and e-audiobooks. The main thing is you are trying to capture how many you have purchased specifically for your patrons through your library this year. You don't need to figure out what the consortium has. We will add that in ourselves, so you don't need to do that. And then there's the question about serials, magazines. We're not asking that anymore. And that is it for holdings. Oh, no, I lied. Sorry. There's one more. Databases. Basically, you're going to tell us how many things you have, how many databases you purchase specifically for your patrons. This can be things like Mango or Consumer Reports or Ancestry, anything that you have that your patrons get to use, whether it's limited to the building or they can use it at home. We just need a number of databases. So, and then we'll add in what's in the state collection right here that we give everybody access to. Okay, so I'm going to jump to services, but if anybody has a question about holdings, please raise your hand or unmute yourself or put something in chat. So yeah, so okay. So there's a little bit of sort of two different. Tracy asks, sorry, I should say this out loud. Mango is considered a database? Yes. So in this context, for the number of databases you have, each of these, anything like that, is going to be called a database. Anything that gives patrons access to a thing. Biblio Plus would count as a database here. And not Oh, you know what? Actually, video ones go elsewhere. Sorry, because this is changing up. I think I need to actually take a look at it to clarify whether the video ones, I'm going to leave myself, no, do the video ones count as databases here? I think that I think I need to clarify that. Sorry. I should have that. I should have known that, but now I'm a little fuzzy on it because of the way that they get handled. So we'll talk about database usage in a second. But Mango definitely would be a database. Canopy, the video ones, just like Overdrive, doesn't get counted there. I think the video ones wouldn't necessarily get counted either. But thank you, Tracy. Any other questions on holdings? Okay. So we are okay. So services. This is the lion's share of the report. Maybe not the lion's share, but it is a significant chunk of it. Probably a third of the report is under services. Okay. First off, we asked number of registered borrowers. This is whatever your ILS tells you is your number of borrowers, or if you don't have an ILS, if you have paper copies, that's that. It's adults, children, and if you use young adult category, there'll be one for that, or you can put in totals. Then we have number of annual visits. This is ideally, this is the number of people who have physically entered your building. Every time that someone physically enters your building, if you have an electronic counter, that's what we want. But if you track by hand, it should, in theory, be everybody who comes in, no matter why they come in. If they come in for the bathroom, if they come in to look at your bulletin board, if they come in for a program, that counts as a visit. It's people who have physically walked in the building. Conversely, if people go to something but don't come in the building, they are not counted as an annual visit. Okay. Reference questions. This is an amount for the year. I know this is a hard one for a lot of people to track. So do what you can, but if you don't have the number, put M for missing. Reference question. It talks about what is a reference question, but most things are reference questions. Purely directional things are not reference questions, but almost everything else is. There's an explanation of it that you can click on, but in general, it's pretty broad. How many patrons were trained on technology one-on-one? This is sort of a subset of reference, but that's how often does that happen? Next, these will change, the ebook and e-audiobook ones. So I'm going to skip over it. Starting this year, you're going to be asked how many uses are ebooks, e-audiobooks, e-audio of any kind, e-serials, and video, online video. But you're not going to break it down by age. We can talk about if you get to a point and are like, I don't understand how to get that from my product, just talk to me and we will figure it out. In some cases, it could be challenging. And then we have database usage. This is everything that's a database, which is basically everything that is not checked out for some period of time. Like with ebooks, Overdrive or something, generally you're checking something out for a period of time. Anything that's not checked out gets counted here. So Mango, Ancestry, Consumer Reports, Vermont Online Library, Udemy, etc. These all go under database usage. All right. Oh, again, so you can navigate. I should have said this before. I should have sort of ground rules of this of the survey. You can navigate by going forward or back at the bottom. Should have opened with this. I apologize. Though it works roughly the same as the old one. It just looks different. You can also navigate on the left by jumping around categories. And we'll talk about the top stuff in a second. But you can also click previous and next here and save. Save is less important, but it isn't bad if you're still in a field, you would need to click that. Otherwise, it'll automatically save every time you change fields. Okay. Next, physical circ. This is books, audiobooks, non-traditional items, everything like that. Broken down ideally by adult, teen, and children. Broken down by what group the item is for, not what age the patron is. So if an adult is taking out a YA book, that should be in a YA book. Again, these should be coming out of your ILS in general, so they should just happen. You don't need to like judge how old somebody is. All right. And then a total if you can't get it. And then also the circulation of other physical items, aka non-traditional items, muffin tins and puzzles, etc. Okay. Then we have a question about interlibrary loans. How many did you get, and how many did you receive? So provided to, how many did you send out? Received from, how many did you get back? These should, if possible, count if you're in, for example, Catamount, they should include consortial lending. Things that you send to other libraries in your system still count as ILL, if you can get that number, if that number is available. All right, programming. I am going to mostly skip over programming because it's going to look a lot different. But as we said earlier, it's going to get broken into, break it down by age. All right, that part's done. Break it down by location. All right, that part's down. You don't have to do them both kind of in a combined way where there's this huge matrix. A thing I will repeat about programs is, first off, is age. Age is the program age is who is it most aimed at? What age group is the program most intended for? Not who could come to it in theory, but who is it most for? If you have, well, yeah. So that's the most important piece. The second part of that is when you're counting attendance for age, if somebody goes to a kids program, they are counted under kids program attendance. If somebody goes to an adult program, they are counted under adult program attendance. You don't need to know how old any of the attendees are. You never have to look at someone and guess their age. It only kids programs, kids program attendance, adult programs, adult program attendance. So that's an important thing that I think sometimes gets lost. There's a sense that you are judging how old a person is and which category they should be lumped into. You do not ever need to do that. That is not a thing. It never will come up. So let's see. I think I have a question. Oh, okay. Sorry. Myrna, a second ago, said state passes, are they part of holdings and are they considered lending of materials? State passes should go under non-traditional items. Any passes that you have will go under non-traditional, which is really a catch-all for everything that doesn't like the normal categories. But yes, and they should be counted in both under holdings and under circulation when they go out. Thank you for asking that. Okay, so programming, again, if you have questions about programming, and you might, because it's still a complicated thing, reach out to me and we can figure them out. But in general, those are the biggest lessons. And then the only other one thing is making sure that the thing that you're doing is a program and not something else. But we can talk about that individually. Okay, so I'm sliding through programming. Again, this will be a lot shorter next year. Okay, so there are a few additional questions that are kind of tacked on to programming. First off, non-library sponsored programs. These are programs that you hold in the building that you don't really have much to do with except providing a space. That can be anything, as long as you're not involved in it. Boy Scout clubs, so it can be like the Lego club or something. If you don't have something to do with it. If you do have something to do with it, it counts under your normal program, so you don't need to worry about this. This is basically capturing when libraries share their meeting rooms with outside organizations that don't have anything to do with them. Because I think this has become a bigger and bigger part of libraries, and we just are trying to capture that. Okay, this is recorded programming. This one is a little bit confusing, but basically, if you are making you have a program that's a virtual program, or you just recorded something with a video camera, you put a recorded version of it somewhere, and people look at it. This is where you would put that. So every time that you do that, every time there's a recording available on your website or linked from your website or on your Facebook or what have you, that would count as a program presentation, and then you would look at total views, if possible, after 30 days, within 30 days, and say, this is how often it is viewed. This is a hard question, and it can be challenging. So do your best. It's not, I'd say it's not a core question. It's not one that I would spend an enormous amount of time on. Next, self-directed activities. This is when you put out something for the patrons to do. You put out take-home crafts. You're asking people to do a social media challenge. You put out a trivia piece. There's an outdoor story walk. Anything like that. That's not a program because there's not a back and forth. You're not presenting to someone. They just go and do it on their own. It is a self-directed activity. So put that every time you do a different self-directed activity, that goes here, then you can describe it. There's a little spot to do it. Every time you change it up, it's a new activity. And then a rough estimate of how many people you think did it based on how many have been taken. But we know that's going to be a rough estimate. Okay, so that's self-directed. Then we talk about deliveries. The categories are to individuals' homes, to childcare providers and centers, and then to other sites. So these, if you do deliveries, this is where they go. And then last but not least are computer services. Computer services ask, how many computers do you have? Public computers do you have? How many public computers are available that have internet access? And then how often do they get used? This is an annual number that we want. In a couple of these cases, it will ask whether you have an annual count or an estimate based on a typical week. So you just fill that out. That's part of the federal thing. Wireless sessions. How many wireless sessions did you have in the year? And then website visits got dropped. So don't need that anymore. That is services. I'm just going to go through the last part because this is very short, and then we can cover anything that was in services. Here's a couple spots. You say whether you have any feedback about the report, anything that we could do differently to improve it. Please feel free to be brutal in here. Anything that you think could help, put it in there. It's not a critique of me. It's a critique of our process. Anything we can do to make it better. Doesn't mean we can do it, but any feedback you can give, we appreciate. So you put that here. Then you say that you're done. You certify it. And then you are complete. So any questions on the survey parts that I've described? And you can either mute yourself, put something in chat, or raise your hand. Okay, so there's another thing we're going to talk about is actually I am going to talk about edit checks. Okay, so you've entered all of your information in the survey, and you're like, okay, I'm ready. This is great. I'm done. There's sort of one last step, which is you click on status up here. And there's not going to be anything to see here specifically, but well, okay, I lied. There actually is. You get at the top of status, you see three things. You see edit checks, you see unanswered questions, and you see flagged questions. Edit checks are things where the system thinks that it's like this, maybe this number is wrong. It's very different from last year's number. There's a big change up or down or something like that. So that's how you get an edit check. Or occasionally you've entered something that does not make sense, but usually it's just the number is way higher or way lower. Additionally, unanswered questions, there are questions that are required and questions that aren't. If you did not fill out a required question, it's going to be here, and you're going to need to fill it out before you can go for it. Flagged questions are anything that you flag yourself. There's a little spot on every question, a little flag. You put that, that's basically for you to go back to. If there's a flagged question, you can't go ahead either. But edit checks. Okay, so edit checks are the big ones, probably. First off, so an edit check happens because the system thinks that the number doesn't make sense based on what you entered last year. In many cases, so take a crack at it, but if you're stuck or it doesn't seem to be taking what you want or you're not sure why it's there, always ask me. I have a more context to edit checks because I deal with them a lot. So it's don't kill yourself on the edit checks. Feel free to come and ask me, and I can, in many cases, figure out what the answer should be. But they're there because, again, because there was a big change. In some cases, the big change, because it does percentages, you were like, oh, last year we did 9 or something, and this year we did 25. That is not a big difference. So what it's looking for is an explanation. And the explanation, ideally, should answer why it's different. Often people will put, that's the number as their explanation, which means there's a 100% chance I'm going to come back and ask you follow-up questions if you say, because that's the number. In general, like if you had 300 of something last year, and this year you have 1,500 of something, why did it change? What happened? Why is it different? That's what we're trying to get to. And if you have trouble with it, if it's just if you're not coming up with a great answer or it's stuck, you ask me, we will figure out an answer. It'll be fine. They're not, don't stress about them, but they're basically the system wants an explanation for why something changed from last year. And it can be something like we just did way more programming this year, or we had a staff member we didn't before, or we lost a staff member we did last year. But that's the last thing. Once those are all resolved, the edit checks, the unanswered questions, and the questions that you flagged, and you fill out the certification and everything, then you submit, and it goes poof, and the survey is done. And everybody is excited and happy. Yeah, so that is, let's see, did I skip something super important? I don't think I did. Okay, I am going to stop sharing this. And I'm going to come back with my screen. All right, that was a sort of lightning tour through the report. Oh, a thing that I didn't mention, sorry, is that on our website, we have a page called Submitting the Annual Report for Public Libraries. It has a lot of what I've just said. It will have a recording of this webinar. It has a lot of help. There's frequently asked questions. There is it leads you to help on getting some of your online numbers. There's a lot of stuff there, but don't feel like it's your job to figure this out. It's my job to help you. So if you go there and you're like, this isn't working, just ask me. Again, it's just there as a possible support. Okay. So now it's open for questions, any kind of question, unmute yourself or put your hand up and we will get things answered. It could be on any piece of the report or even report adjacent. Yes, Wendy.
Yes, if you are inputting data into your, say, number of patrons, and you know that there's a big change, say you've done a massive weeding of all your patrons during the year, can you pre-enter an excuse rather than having to wait for the data check?
Sort of. Okay, so in an ideal world, you could put it right. Hold on, I'm going to make sure because some things have actually changed, and I want to make sure that it. Yeah. So unfortunately, it would be great if it just appeared right next to the question. But it doesn't do that, alas. But you can, once you put it in there, you can just go into status, go into edit checks right away, and put it in. You don't need to wait for edit checks. Well, you need to wait. You need to put the data in first, or it won't bring up the edit check. But it doesn't need to really be at the end of the process. It can be right after you put data in. But it's not on the same page, unfortunately. You have to jump around to make that happen. But yeah, that's not a bad idea, right? While you know that's going to be a thing, you could totally do that. Another approach you could use. No, I think that would be a good way to do it. It's just a little bit of a pain, but it's maybe better, less of a pain than going to it at the end. Does that make sense? Hopefully. I mean, again, I wish it worked.
It makes sense. And I think that if you know that, especially you said the data from last year was there as well. So if you put your new data in next year old data and you see it's half the size, then it's going to be flagged. So why not get rid of it there and then?
Yes, that is a great idea. And you can also do in that vein, you could fill out a section and then do all the edit checks for that section right then, whatever process works best. But you don't need to wait till the end and because it can be you'd be like, I'm done. Oh, I only have 45 edit checks. So that can be a sad moment. But again, edit checks are not as intimidating as they seem. We will usually get the answers for them, but you can definitely do it right away. Any other questions on surveying in general?
I'm just wondering, hello. I'm just wondering if there is just a Word document or a PDF with all the questions, because I'd like to give my accountant or whatever, or the bookkeeper, the list of questions I need for her, but not that she needs to go into the survey.
Yes. Okay. So I'm going to, I'll put it in the chat, but it is, so if you go to our page that's about the annual report, which I just put in here, and you scroll almost to the bottom, it says useful information, and under that is questions for it says questions for 2023. It's actually the 2024 questions, so my apology. I will fix that. But it is there, and it's in. There's a Word version and a PDF, whichever you want to work with. And those are there. I can also send it to you if you want it. Another thing I can also easily do, and I should have mentioned this earlier, is if you want a version of it with well, I can't actually do this until the survey's open. When the survey's open, I can get you a version of the new questions with last year's answers, if last year's answers are helpful. That's always a thing. So if you ever need, so if that's the thing you need, or if you ever need to know what your last year's answers or 3 years answers or anything like that, you can do it yourself to a certain degree, but it's often easier for me to do it. But yeah, so that'll give you the whole survey as a Word or a PDF. And if you get the Word one, you could also just copy and paste out the parts that the revenue, which is sort of the middle, income and expenses, which is kind of the middle. You could just break that out if you don't want them to have to look at everything else. Does that cover that? Hopefully.
Yes.
But yeah,
thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. No, that's a great question. No, I think it's not a terrible idea to just also to either have that Word file and just put your answers into it so you have a spot for them, or print it out and do it by hand and then put that away somewhere. I also know some people have this is more work, but you can also put it into a spreadsheet and just have all of your answers every year in it. So you see everything that you did the last 3 years. Again, that's more work. You don't have to do that. But whatever approach you use, I think worst case, just having all the questions in front of you is not a bad thing. I certainly find it helpful myself. Other questions that people might have about the report or anything else? Oh, sorry, backing up. When you look up annual report on our website, it's a little confusing because there are 2 separate pages. There's basically I'm filling out the report and I want to know how to do it and I want access to all that stuff. And here's the data from previous years. So if you get to the spot and it just shows you the data from the links to data from last year, you're in the wrong page. There's another page, but you should hopefully be able to find it pretty straightforwardly. Any other questions that people might have? And this is so far from your last opportunity to ask. You can ask questions anytime you want, day or night. We can have a phone call. We can have a Teams chat. We can, if you're like, okay, I just don't get this part, we'll go through the whole thing question by question. I'm here for any help that I can provide you while you're doing the survey. I know it's a big lift while you're running a library. So anything I can do to make it easier at any time, please do not hesitate to ask. If I've definitely done it where I'm like, okay, new librarian, we're going to spend an hour and a half. We're going through the entire survey. Boom, 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 boom. Happy to do that anytime. I may not be able to drive to your library to help, but Everything else is on the table. Okay, so then the last thing I will say, and while people can just think a little more, is thank you, thank you, thank you. We really, really, really appreciate all the effort that you put into it. I know it's a big lift. We know that you have a million other things going on and that it is can be challenging to get these numbers. We are so appreciative of everything that you do. And I mean, we're so appreciative of everything that you do all the time because you're the people who make this happen. You're the people who are helping everybody in Vermont. We're just way, way, way behind the scenes. But with the report, we're particularly helpful. I'm individually thankful for all that you do. So anything that we can do to make it better and make it easier on you, we are happy to do. All right, last call for questions. Right now, last call for questions at this very moment. Okay, again, repeating, there is another webinar next week. The other webinar is going to be focused on changes from last year. It is going to be basically a duplication of part of this one, so you don't necessarily need to go to it. I'm intending to have some open hours as we go, but you don't need to wait for open hours. You can just ask me anytime. All right, I think we are going to close up shop. Thank you so much for taking time out to attend this. There will be a recording if you need to go, if you have insomnia, basically, or if you need to go back to something. Thanks so much. I really appreciate it. I hope everybody has a great rest of your week and has a good weekend. And really, thanks again. I really, really appreciate all your work. All right, I will stop my recording. Of course, Eddie, the